Hello friends, welcome back to the show. Today I spoke to Matt Maruca, the founder of Ra Optics. If you are watching, you will see these fancy blue light blocking glasses on my face, and he has founded proudly the world's most expensive and best blue light blocking glasses on the market. We talk about exactly why that is, why clear light blue blockers are a scam, the importance of your light diet and mal-illumination. We talk about the importance of light as it runs the show, the clocks of the eyes, the metabolic machinery, energy production, mitochondria. But we also talk about light as an inner light and a connection to source and something higher than oneself and finding meaning in this crazy world, being a modern human. It's a very fun show. Matt is incredibly smart and he distills this message of quantum biology better than most people on the planet can do it. So get ready to go to school and let's listen to Matt Maruca. Matt Maruca, welcome to the show, my friend. You probably won't remember this because you've probably encountered thousands of people at conventions and such since, but I remember many years ago, what feels like many years ago now, it was before Heart and Soil was a thing, certainly before Radical Health Radio was a thing. I encountered you at PaleoFX, and I think it was your first time there with these super cool custom designed lenses that are now known as Ra Optics. And I've followed you ever since, and I really love the way you distill this message. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see two long-haired bros rocking the Ra Optics glasses today, orange and yellow lenses, and you might see this popping up more and more in the health world. So we're definitely going to have a fun conversation about why we're actually doing that. And I've borrowed many of your terms, man, the light diet. And I think it's a really cool concept that you bring to the table. So as we get ready to dive into all of that, I'm first curious about, what even put you in this position? What's the story a little bit? Take us on a backstory of how you became known as, the light diet guy and the founder of Ra Optics.
Thanks, man. Well, first of all, that's super cool. That was an amazing conference at PaleoFX. We had been tinting lenses in my garage pretty much until late the night before, and I was flying in to get all prepped, and it was a very difficult and stressful time, but we were doing everything we could to bring a great new product to the market, and it was very, very exciting, and we did have a lot of success and engagement there, which was promising. So that was 2018, I want to say April or May.
Wow.
So as far as my story goes, when I was a kid, I was having some various health issues, gut issues, allergies, headaches, and I kind of accepted them as genetic because what else are you going to do when you're 10 years old, and the doctors tell you take Tums for your gut issues, and that's a gastroenterologist told me that. An allergist told me, just take this Zyrtec or Claritin for your allergies, antihistamine, and then the pediatrician just told me take Advil for my headaches. That's literally my experience with Western medicine. I saw a kinesiologist, kind of naturopath, who put me on some kind of yeast cleanse, which maybe helped a little bit, but still didn't really solve the issues. And so by the time I was going into high school, I was around 13, 14. I just started reading on the internet, mainly because I started getting pretty bad breakouts of like acne and this kind of thing and pimples. And I felt super self-conscious at that time, as anyone pretty much would, especially a teenager. And so that actually led me to this idea, like maybe somehow my gut's damaged, maybe, the greasy foods I'm eating are somehow going straight to my pores and clogging my pores. Kind of simple logic, but it kind of made sense. And so then I started reading about how to heal a damaged gut. And that led me down a totally unexpected rabbit hole of nutrition and paleo diets and these types of things and the importance of nutrition. And this was useful and helpful. I felt much better cutting out refined foods, but it didn't, in my experience, address what I think was more of the root cause. And that came much, much later, actually, what I would now consider the root cause. But anyway, the next step was light. So I was reading all these forums and everything in the paleo diet. And eventually I came across one neurosurgeon from the United States who was blogging about really interesting topics like mitochondria and light and all kinds of really fascinating stuff. His name is Dr. Jack Kruse. I'm sure you're familiar with him. And I was fascinated. I was like, whoa, this looks a lot, in some respects, deeper than just nutrition alone. Because, of course, if the body is disrupted in a way that it can't process nutrients properly, it can't utilize the nutrients properly, well, then what good is it to consume? You could consume all the nutrients in the world, but if your body can't really use them, then you could still have issues. And I became interested in this more meta approach, you could call it, or foundational approach to health and biology and living systems. And that led me to learning about the importance of light and circadian rhythms and other factors along those lines, electromagnetic radiation, et cetera, et cetera. And at a certain point, I was living abroad in Eastern Europe, my junior year of high school, my third year. And so I was exposed to a different kind of world, different kind of thinking. It was, totally different. And I was reading online still about all this fascinating health stuff. And then a buddy of mine through these online Facebook groups, a couple years older, so I kind of looked up to him. He said, you should read these books about startups. So I read a few books about startups, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, the Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, and 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. 4 great books. And those basically put me on a trajectory of like, wow, I'm going to start my own business. Like I could totally, basically 0 to 1 says if you know something the rest of the world doesn't know, you have an opportunity. And I thought, wow, that sounds great, because I definitely was so confident that I knew something that nobody else knew, and or very few people knew. And so that was what got me thinking about this business. And then by the time I came home, it was my senior year. It was like the struggles and thinking, and eventually it led to me starting my company after the last year of high school to make blue light protection glasses. And that is another story that came in a very unexpected way, that I could tell later if you'd like me to. But basically, unexpectedly, I started making blue light protection glasses because of a friend of mine now. His name's Luke Story. You're probably familiar with him as well. He's also in Austin. And and the rest is kind of history. Now we're going onwards and upwards. We're developing the future of lighting for the world, and at least we're working on it. It takes some time, but yeah, that's how I kind of ended up here.
I love it, man. Thank you for setting the scene. There's many threads we're going to go down today, but I want to start asking you this question of why are Ra Optics proudly the most expensive blue blockers? You own that. Why is that?
Yes. Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. Well, there are a few reasons, but the main thing I would say is that we're committed to perfection, or as close as you can get to perfection, right? Perfection is a pretty high ideal to aspire to, but I think it's worth aspiring to, because if you don't, you're definitely not going to get even close, right? So from the beginning, the thing that we did differently, that I did differently, was I wanted to offer lenses that blocked the right wavelengths of light in a stylish, high quality, and attractive frame. And since you asked, to illustrate the point, it is worth telling the story of how the company started, even briefly. So I was thinking of different things that I might do to make money, different ways to leverage this knowledge that I had come across and was convinced was really important, both for me and for others. And I thought maybe I'll be like a coach, like a consultant or something about lighting. Maybe I'll start a light bulb company. Those are two of the bigger ideas that I had. There were several other smaller ideas, but those were, top candidates. I did not think I would make blue light protection glasses or blue blocking glasses, simply because it seemed boring, honestly. Little did I know. But anyway, it definitely wouldn't be boring. That is one word I would not use to describe it at all. But anyway, the thing is that there was a company, there were a few companies that existed at the time. One was Uvex, which is a safety goggles company. That is what most of the quote unquote, quantum health people were wearing back at that time, like even pre-biohacking almost. And then there was a company called Swannies, which existed very early. So kudos to them for kind of trying to create blue blocking glasses with a nice looking frame and lenses that block almost the right wavelengths. The issue with Swannies was that they weren't blocking enough of the blue light to be really relevant. They've gotten a bit better over the years. They've changed this and that. They're still not really ideal. I can tell you the AR coating, the anti-reflective coating on the lenses is very, at least at last I looked at them, it's a very shiny, flashy, reflective blue, which is kind of disturbing for anybody looking at the wearer. And if I don't know if they have that on the inside, but that causes more, some could cause more blue to reflect into your eyes. So we look at these kinds of details. We use green AR coating because it's less disturbing to the person looking at you. But it's, anti-reflective coatings are critical for when you're looking like at a camera right now, I have a video light on me. And if I didn't have an anti-reflective coating on this lens, it would be much brighter. You can still see where it is, but you can still see my eye pretty well. Whereas without it, it would be like bright white and kind of disturbing. So anyway, that's what an anti-reflective coating does. Back to the story. So Swannies was around, and then there were a bunch of other companies, as there are way more now, selling clear lens blue blocking glasses. And that was about it. One company launched on Kickstarter called Carbon Shade that was trying to make it cool and stylish and block the right wavelengths, but they ended up being these big, heavy, clunky, they weren't so heavy, but they were big and clunky glasses. And they kind of disappeared eventually because they just weren't that good. And it clearly, just wasn't picking up with customers. So I had to have mine custom made through a company in the US that was responsible for, creating the tints that block the right wavelengths. And a buddy of mine helped me figure that out because he was into this as well. And he actually looked into it and said, oh, we could do this and this. And I was like, oh, cool. But it was expensive and time consuming. It cost like, $200 for a nice Ray-Ban frame. And then we had to get the optician to cut these lenses, which cost another $50 or $100. And then we had to send them off for the tinting, which cost another $70 or $50 or whatever dollars. And then the shipping and then the whole thing. So it was like $300, $400 all in, time consuming. And that's without a prescription. So somebody has prescriptions, they're going to pay even more. But so anyway, and again, a lot of time, most people just aren't going to do that. So then I finally was like, okay, I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Jack Kruse one day. He was being interviewed by Luke Story, and I was pushing a lawnmower trying to save money for my gap year, which I was doing after high school. And it was the summer after senior year, and it was great. And I was walking barefoot, pushing a lawnmower all day, making money and listening to podcasts. I was stoked. And then Luke Story says, hey, I'm going to be in New York City, next week, talking about my stuff and things I'm interested in. Come join me. And I was like, that's cool. I'm going to ask if I can go on his podcast, because I just knew that unfortunately, very few people would understand the deep level of science that Dr. Kruse was talking about. Although I think more and more people are now. In 2017, it was like, nah. So anyway, I went, talked to Luke. He said, sure. And that same night, he asked me and my buddy, like, yo, where'd you get your cool custom glasses? Like, I'm into fashion. I was like, and I just saw an article about how you could make your own blue blocking glasses. And so I was like, I can do it for you. I tried to connect him with this other company. It was a pain in the butt. So then finally I said, I could do it for you. And his pair of glasses, he still wears them, was the first pair of raw optics. So just to say why, to your question, like proudly the most expensive, the main things are that we, from the beginning, were committed to combining a high quality science-based blue light protection with high quality stylish products and frames and styles. Since then, we've only increased the quality significantly as we had better access to supply chains and whatnot. And yeah, we block the right wavelengths. We work with the leading scientist in the world, Dr. Alexander Wunsch from Germany, who helps us determine exactly what we need to block for the maximum therapeutic effect and protective effect while not overdoing it. With companies like TrueDark, they just block everything. Their red lenses are too dark. There's really no point in that. And so, yeah, we shy away from this kind of like, we use more of a chisel approach as opposed to an axe approach, you could say. We also look, in addition to the right protection of the lenses, we also focus on the highest quality, like color perception, again, so you can function. And that's more relevant for the yellow lenses during the day, because the red lenses, even ours, are still quite dark relatively, but they're not as dark and overdone as some of the other companies out there, as I mentioned. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, we put anti-reflective coatings on all of our lenses. We use super high quality frames. So those are some of the main factors that make raw optics a superior product. And at the end of the day, we guarantee our products. So if anybody purchases them, you have a month to use them. If you don't feel a huge effect or love them, we'll take them back. So that's how confident we are. We have people with, like, just the other day, like some woman with 2 million followers posting on her stories, like, I do all this stuff for my health, but I just put on these glasses, Garmin sleep score, like hockey stick curve. HRV hockey stick curve. That's all she changed. And we had the same thing when we partnered with Aura. So I'd say, yeah, the commitment to quality, the commitment to science, the focus on doing the best we can, doing right by our customers, and always working on improving is what people are really investing in when they purchase a pair. And by the way, we spend a lot of energy to educate people. So it's like, by the time somebody purchases from Raw Optics, they don't realize it. But we've been spending 7 years trying to teach people about this. And all the other companies, by the way, that have high quality, stylish blue blocking glasses or close to it, basically just copied us. And I know that because if founder of one of them told me that. So
Yeah, that makes total sense, man. That was kind of my story too, admittedly. I loved your stuff from day one, but I was kind of a little shy to pull the trigger on the most expensive ones. So lo and behold, what happened is I got a bunch of other pairs and they weren't that great. And finally, over a year ago now, I got some RAs and I put them on and immediately felt the difference. I'm not even kidding. When I put them on, I felt like my eyes go, ah, and I was like, okay, there are levels to this. And I think one of the things that I've experienced is, like you mentioned, clear lens blue blockers. And I think what they were trying to combat is some people are kind of like, I don't want to wear yellow or orange lenses. They kind of look goofy. Although I've only ever got compliments on these. People love them. They're like, they're really cool. Where'd you get them from? But that brings another issue. Are clear light blue blocking glasses a scam? Do they work?
yeah, huge scam, huge scam. Oh man, this is so great that you asked. You know what? Because you asked, I am going to see, just give me a moment. This is how I see in the dark, my red light.
Okay.
I'm going to get my meter. I can just test right now and show you. Stand by. Now, the key thing is I just have to pray that my meter has a little bit of juice, which it looks like it does.
Let's go.
If it didn't have juice, I'd have to just plug it in and then we could, do this demonstration later. But let's see. Turning on, dark calibration. See, so there's no funny business going on here, everybody. All right, dark calibration finished. And look, we have a little bit of juice. All right. Oh, very little juice. Okay. Well, make this quick. So basically, I'll just give you a real demonstration right now. If you're listening to the podcast, folks, you just have to go on YouTube.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn off my blue light blocking, and you should like and subscribe and comment and engage and share the interview with all your friends. Obviously, duh. So blank screen, spectrometer. Hope the juice lasts. All right, so that's an RGB display. You change the levels of red, green, and blue, and you get colors. But they make white. I'm pointing this at a white Apple Note, just so you know. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm pointing at. But if I pointed at my video light, my LED-based video light, then you see a warm white LED curve. If I change the color temperature, you'll see what changes in my face when I increase the color temperature. A lot more blue and a lot less. So now I'm going warm again. And it's a warm again with a lot less blue, just for fun. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the RGB display, the screen. Boom. Blue light. Start with the yellow lenses, actually, just so you can see the step-by-step approach. So this is hopefully all coming through. You can see this well when I show the meter, correct? Okay, cool. So now I point this here, put the lens in front of it. So just so you know, what I'm doing is just this, so to block the light. And so the blue is completely gone with the yellow lenses. So just to show one more time, blue, yellow lens in front of the meter, gone.
Yep.
All right. Now, sunset lens. Keep an eye on the green. So, mostly gone. And we let a little bit of green. This is with helping color perception. But so that's basically raw optics. Now, back to the clear lenses. Now, this is from Hoya. There's 3 large lens companies in the world. There's Essilor, Hoya, and Zeiss. This is Hoya's Blue Protect thing. You can see that flashy blue reflective coating. So you think you're getting this protection. Well, let's see. Are you or are you not? I put it like this. Put it in front of the same exact place I've been doing all the rest of them. And then you can be the judge for yourself.
Wow.
So there's virtually no blue light protection. Now, what I don't have for you right now to measure is daylight because it is dark outside. And even if I did, I could open the windows here. But if I did have daylight, you'd see a very broad spectrum across this whole thing from the ultraviolet or the violet, which is like 380 and below, all the way up to red, and near infrared goes beyond 780. This is just for visible light. Now, basically, these lenses, what they do is they block blue light up to 420 nanometers. So if I had a spectrum that had that light below that range, which I don't have, but because that's what daylight is, but none of even my LED thing, if I make it a lot colder, here, wait, let's see if I make this thing colder. If I make it colder and I measure the LED thing, which is a different spectrum than my screen, it's still not really below 420 nanometers, but let's just try it anyway, just for fun. See if the spectrum changes at all. Virtually none, because below 430, there's still that little bit. But all that's to say that if I use this in daylight, Jesus, that blue light is killing me. If I use this in daylight, this meter, you would see light below that 420 range, and then you could see this lens blocking that. Okay. So if you're concerned that daylight is a problem, which it could be in excess theoretically, then you could block that lower, shortest wavelength range with this. And that's the highest energy range, and that includes ultraviolet. But when you're talking about screens, the light that they emit simply isn't in the range that these lenses block. So yeah, they're worthless when it comes to screens and LEDs, which are the basis of all modern lighting. And again, this is like a Hoya Blue Protect lens, which is literally one of the industry leading lenses. They sell, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure that those eyewear companies, oh yeah, I got to take off the red light, making me look like a dork, or like a mystic. I don't know, one of the two. But anyway, the thing is that these lenses, I mean, they're adding this coating for like sometimes $200,
wow.
like $200 on top of your expensive already. And people think our glasses are expensive. People are paying $300 for a prescription pair of glasses and adding a $200 or $150, usually not much less, coating to their product that doesn't even block the wavelength. So it's like the biggest gimmick ever, I want to say, like ever in the history of marketing of products. And we're going to unearth this. It's just kind of a matter of time, or expose, you could say. But they just don't block the wavelengths emitted by screens. I think, like you said, it's because people don't want to wear colored lenses, and the only way to block those wavelengths is using color, because when you subtract the visible blue, then what happens is you see yellow as a result. It's literally like cause and effect, you know, plus and minus. It's physics. Anyway.
That's super cool.
Our lenses, I didn't even say this, why we're probably the most expensive. I think there is a company from Norway that's more expensive than us now, so we're gonna have to kick them out of that spot. But anyway, price is going up. No, I'm just kidding. Be careful, everybody. Jump soon. But anyway, the point is, like, we actually also just block the right wavelengths, period. So if I focus, and I think this is what the whole, us and Bond Charge and some of the other companies, we should unite rather than compete within this tiny niche, because it's not that tiny, but relative to the optical industry and how many pairs of these lenses they're selling, they're probably selling 100 times as many as the colored blue light protection lenses combined, just because they already have the entire global supply chain and they're just adding this coating.
Wow.
And so we actually block the right wavelengths, which is kind of like, you can't overemphasize that. We do the research. We're actually helping people. And again, what's it worth when you can put on a pair of glasses, you change nothing else. You put on a pair of glasses and your sleep score goes up in a way that you can measure on your Oura Ring, Garmin, Whoop, or Apple Watch. Like, come on. Yeah. That's the best $174 you'll ever spend in your life.
Yes, exactly. And back to that, your point about the light diet. It's something that a lot of people, it just slips through consciousness for some reason. They think about diet of food. They might even go a step further and think about their media consumption as their, intellectual diet or whatever, but they don't think about this light diet piece. Like, we're talking here about the importance and what this can do to actually block the right wavelengths and how it's going to improve your sleep score. But exactly why? Like, why do we want to block blue light? We kind of glossed over that a little bit. Like, explain that out for our listeners. Why is blue light so damaging to the eyes? You even said, as you turn your camera down, you said, man, this blue light is killing me. And not literally, but maybe literally, in a slow dose makes the poison kind of way. What is the toxicity of the blue light and the junk light diet that we experience on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great place to go. So let's see. To start out, just to give context, I would say that it's very important for people to understand how light affects life in general. So life itself, we could say, is kind of a complex interaction between energy and matter. Or said another way, life as we know it is the result of a certain flow of energy through the Earth's environment. And one of the main sources of energy, I'd say the main source of energy for life on Earth, is solar radiation or solar energy, sunlight. So sunlight energy comes in and its qualities interact with the qualities of matter on the surface of the Earth and cause things to move, let's say, in certain ways. And over billions of years of biological evolution, according to evolutionary biologists, certain structures were formed, and what we call life now exists. And this life is pretty much inextricably linked to the qualities of the energy flowing through the environment that allowed it to exist and continue to allow it to exist, such that if that energy source were removed, life would pretty quickly cease to exist, at least life as we know it. So it's kind of like if you think about a windstorm blowing through a desert and then you see the patterns of the wind left in the sand. That's kind of like the relationship between sunlight and life as we know it, except the wind is still blowing and the patterns are still existing and changing, and they're sustained by this wind in the sense of biology. The sunlight, I mean, is shining and it's illuminating us, let's say. So basically, light has different levels of power, and ultraviolet radiation, which people are familiar with because you can get a sunburn from it. You can also get a tan. You can also make vitamin D, but you can get a sunburn from ultraviolet radiation. It's very powerful. So if you compare the spectrum of light, just so people can kind of get a baseline here, if you look at ultraviolet, it has much more energy per photon. If you look at infrared, which is the other side of the spectrum, these are both invisible ranges of light outside of our visible spectrum that our eye perceives in significant quantities. But these have very different energies per photon. So infrared has much less, ultraviolet has much more. Ultraviolet is what is part of a class of what's called ionizing radiation. So it has enough energy that it can actually knock apart, or it's not quite there, but it's getting closer. It can knock basically atoms apart. Or, yeah, it can break apart atoms. That's why ionizing radiation is such an issue, because it can create, it can destabilize molecules. Pardon me, it's not breaking apart atoms, it's knocking apart electrons, or knocking off electrons on atoms, which then cause them to be unstable. Because when an electron is knocked off of an atom, it's looking to steal an electron from elsewhere to balance its valence shells, and then, which is the outer orbitals. And so when any molecule goes and tries to steal electrons, we call it a free radical. And that's a problem for biological structures. So that's what ionizing radiation can do. Now, non-ionizing radiation, that's a separate conversation. That doesn't directly break apart atoms in this way, knocking off electrons. It affects matter in different ways. The standard, just as a side note, the standard under the international body that governs the stuff called ICNIRP, International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, is that if non-ionizing radiation, let's say microwaves or Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, radio waves, if that isn't hot enough or strong enough to cook your tissue like a microwave, it has no biological effect. It's called the thermal standard. So that's the standard that's held by that international body, which has made cell phone proliferation and Wi-Fi and all these things totally a free-for-all, because they refuse to acknowledge any effects that are non-thermal, meaning not directly cooking tissue. And yet thousands of peer-reviewed studies on non-ionizing radiation have found very significant effects, including cancer causing and cataracts, et cetera, from things like microwaves and radio waves. But that's the tangent. So getting back to the shorter wavelengths, which have more intensity, so ultraviolet, blue light's right next to ultraviolet. So even though it's not as intense as ultraviolet, it can cause similar effects, especially with prolonged exposure. So that's kind of like the short answer to your question. Prolonged exposure, like even me, I think when I first learned, I'm sure, when I first learned about light, I was much more bullish, like, oh, sunbathe all the time. And then I just would get burnt and overdid it because I was kind of not really using sound judgment based on advice I was kind of absorbing. And I would overdo it. And that's not really smart, because ultraviolet light, you cause photochemical damage to your skin. And it is possible that you could, over time, increase your risk of things like cancer, even with excessive exposure. But you don't need excessive exposure. Sometimes, depending on your skin tone, sometimes sunbathing, for example, in the case of sunbathing, 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, maybe 10 minutes a day, depending on the person and the time of day and the time of year, right? Like if you're really white and light skin and it's the middle of the summer in the middle of the day, you might only sunbathe 2 minutes on each side of your body, and that'll be a great start. But anyway, speaking of moderation, so back to blue light, just to kind of try to bring this one home so you can get the take-home message. So again, prolonged exposure to blue light can have similar effects as even shorter exposure to ultraviolet light. So we want to be careful with all of these things. Blue light causes a variety of different issues, but when we're talking about the intensity of the light, it can cause oxidative damage in structures in the body. So for example, like the retina is very sensitive. It's very exposed to light because the cornea, the pupil are kind of transparent to light, meaning they let it through. That's why it looks black, because the light's going in. So the retina is very vulnerable. Skin actually has more protective mechanisms to keep light out, but the eye tries to take light in. And so in daylight, there are a lot of natural systems that exist to reduce any overconsumption. So for example, like if it's too bright, you might go in the shade. Side note, wearing sunglasses kind of undermines these systems, which can be a really big issue both for the eyes and for the skin, for sunburning and so on. But there are various mechanisms during the day. It was something I learned actually recently from the scientists we work with, is that the pupil only accounts for a very small actually amount of adjustment to light. It's very small. It's like 1 order of magnitude, not even, of adjustment in light. Whereas the amount of the change in intensity from daylight to night, it's like 100,000 lux to 1 lux. So it's like very much bigger than the pupil can adjust for. There's actually photochemical changes that happen in the eye. So in other words, specifically rods, which are sensitive in low light conditions, become much more sensitive when light is absent. And part of the issue he was explaining to me is that essentially daylight in a way deactivates this system, so that because the sun is so bright, it tells the eyes it's daytime, turn off, and we're going to use our cones, which are more high definition color vision during daytime. But artificial light, like in a building, I just saw a great reel on Instagram. This dude was testing like with a lux meter, which I should probably carry around too, because this thing is a spectral meter, but it isn't just pure light intensity. But he was showing like at sunrise on even a kind of hazy day, cloudy-ish, half sun, half haze. It was like 20,000 lux. And then he went inside his living room and it was 39 lux. And think about it, it's like orders of magnitude difference, right? And then even in the brightest store he could find, like a Home Depot or whatever, it was like 700 lux, right? So, but the issue is the spectral balance is totally different. In those cases, you're getting 700 lux, which is like 50% blue enriched. And so there's a lot more of these shorter wavelengths, blue light, which can cause these damaging issues. Whereas in the case of daylight, it's 40% near infrared. So it's balanced much more in favor, except in the middle of the day, which you can literally measure with this meter. You can see at sunrise, it's like almost like an incandescent lamp spectrum, where it's very little blue and much more near infrared. In the middle of the day, then the blue and the ultraviolet are balanced essentially with the near infrared and the red, but they almost never would exceed it, right? So the thing is, daylight's always balanced in a way that these protective wavelengths, near infrared wavelengths, are present. And there's actually, let's say, live analysis of cells being exposed to just blue and then just near infrared, and then blue plus near infrared. And the cells that are exposed to the blue plus near infrared have significantly less degradation. You can literally see it in membranes compared to cells just exposed to blue, because again, these light is something that life, and this is a total shift in my perspective from years ago. Ultraviolet light is something that we have to take care of for sure. You have to be careful because it breaks apart structures, like cellular structures. One more thing I'll add, and this can go down another tangent. So just to close that, photochemical damage is answer number 1. Blue light can cause photochemical damage because it's more powerful. So during the day, it's important. People ask, why block blue light during the day? Well, it's not the issue that it's going to block your melatonin and make it hard to sleep during the day. You want that. But it's an issue that from artificial sources, they're enriched with blue light. They're completely not just deficient, but there's an absence of near infrared light to balance blue like there's in the sun. So they can create more photochemical damage and free radical reactive oxygen molecules, which cause damage. There's also the issue of hormonal disruption, which we'll touch on. And this is what I'm getting to now, the second issue. So I asked the scientist, Dr. Wunsch, I was asking him, like, okay, but why blue light? I told him I always kind of assumed, and partially correctly, partially incorrectly, that biology just chose blue light as the wavelength of light to track daytime and nighttime and so on, because blue shifts a lot throughout the day. So at sunrise, there's a lot less. As the sun goes up, there's a lot more blue light. So it seems like the obvious choice, right? And it is kind of related to this reason. However, the real reason, in his opinion, and this is more conjecture because we don't exactly know why life does what it does, but this is a much more, I'd say, educated and holistic viewpoint, is that blue light is always linked to the onset of ultraviolet. In other words, if blue light's coming, it means ultraviolet's following, right? So it's a proxy. And biology is most concerned about ultraviolet. Why? Because again, it has the most potential to break apart biological structures. So it's the thing that we have to protect from the most. Again, I'm not saying ultraviolet's always bad. I've been a proponent of it and I still am. It's important to get a certain dose, but overdosing is definitely bad. Like anybody who's ever had a really good sunburn can tell you just how bad it is. It's really painful. So blue light is always a proxy for oncoming ultraviolet light. And our body is actually, when sun's coming out, we're actually preparing things like releasing cortisol, which also helps to prepare our body for this high intensity light radiation. So it's fascinating to think about it from that different perspective. But blue light is a proxy for ultraviolet. And so blue light is for this reason kind of the main marker of the circadian rhythm, the point of which the circadian rhythm is to allow the organism to anticipate changes in the solar environment and to kind of adapt to these changes. So again, back to your question, why would we want to block it? Well, during the day, I already kind of gave a bit of an explanation for artificial sources. Now, the main reason, which is even maybe more relevant for most people, depends whether you work in an office or not, or go to school or not, because then the other one's just as relevant. But if you get outside a lot and, you know, you're in natural daylight, and artificial lights aren't a huge issue for you, but they are for most people, then the bigger issue is that when the sun sets, that blue light, which is setting that circadian biological stimulus, also turning on our key hormones, so to speak, for the day, serotonin, melatonin, neurotransmitters like dopamine, and so on. It's activating this system that's producing. Now, to be clear, it's not causing us to make melatonin or secrete melatonin. It is stimulating the process through which melatonin is made. I know I'm getting a lot of detail here, but basically, bear with me. So the blue light is telling the brain to wake up. That's a signal the brain gets. And if we have the same blue light in the evening, it's still telling the brain to wake up and not to go to sleep. In other words, make more cortisol and less melatonin, more serotonin, less melatonin. And so the issue with that, I think, can be obvious, but just to state it explicitly, it disrupts our sleep. And sleep is the term we use for cellular repair. I mean, what's happening in sleep, really? Well, darkness comes and then melatonin levels start to rise, and the two are explicitly linked. So darkness comes, melatonin starts to rise. It's really hard to sleep when you have a bright light shining on your face, right? So then television's a little different because even though it's bright, it is bright. It has enough blue light to damage the eyes, but it puts your brain in a trance state, which is why it is still easier to fall asleep to television. But in general, like bright static light is hard to fall asleep to. So anyway, that darkness causes melatonin release, and then melatonin decreases metabolic activity in mitochondria, meaning in all the cells in the brain and the nervous system. That causes a reduction in brainwave activity in the brain. You can measure it. You know, you go from to beta to alpha to theta, and then to delta to deep sleep. And then your cells can start to repair. Kind of like if you were a mechanic, you probably wouldn't try to work on an engine while it was still running. Well, in biology, we don't want the thing fully off because that wouldn't be good for us. But you reduce what's happening. And then melatonin goes to work and starts working on things and healing things. So if we have blue light, just to kind of make it simple, if we have blue light at night, it disrupts that process. So you still might be able to fall asleep, but there's a bit of a disruption in your ability to fall asleep. Even though the intensity, as I mentioned before, of lights indoors is considerably lower than daylight. And at night, it's even lower because people aren't using like Home Depot or Costco lighting in their homes at night. Although unless you go to a Mexican restaurant in Mexico, they are using like ridiculously bright fluorescent lamps. It's insane. But besides that, and maybe Greece, I've seen the same thing. But besides that, people usually aren't using that kind of light at night in their homes in the first world. And even still, there's an effect because it's not as dark as darkness. We need that polarity, like bright light. That's what everybody ought to strive for based on what I've learned. Getting that daylight, especially in the morning, and Huberman talks about this. It's crazy for me that in 2018-19, I was talking about this. Huberman, I don't think anybody knew about him. I didn't know about him. But now he's like the main guy talking about this, which I'm stoked about. Great, right? So he wears raw optics, by the way. Fun fact. So
let's go.
And I'm not making that up. I have photo evidence, but I can't share that. But I do. So anyway, more bright light during the day and more darkness at night. So that's what we need. And raw optics allows you to still function because, like, if you just were blindfold, you wouldn't be very effective in the modern world at night. So raw optics, as I said earlier on, when you asked about why we're probably the most expensive, almost the most expensive, I guess. Norwegians, darn Norwegians. No, I'm just kidding. But so anyway, all right. So the blindfold wouldn't function. We block the wavelengths that you need to block so that you can still function and, still also protect your melatonin. And again, I couldn't emphasize this point enough in case anybody missed it. We did a partnership with Aura in 2022. Really cool partnership. We might be doing one again soon. If you wear an Aura ring, tell your friend to buy a ring. If they buy it, you'll get a free pair of raw optics, something along those lines. That's what we did. So they've done the same thing with Lululemon and all these others. Super cool. But raw optics uniquely improved people's sleep scores more than yoga pants. Shocker. But so people's sleep scores actually went up, and we got dozens and dozens of people who, like, without us even asking, really, well, we sent an email, but it was automatic. I didn't think about it. We got all this feedback coming in, like, whoa, my sleep score went up. Oh, my heart rate variability went up. We had professional athletes tons of professional athletes lately, like the entire tennis tour. The entire tour has started wearing our glasses. Maybe not the entire tour, but like several of the top men's and women's players. Djokovic even has been spotted wearing a frame that looks like our Clyde Daylight, although I can say it's actually not from our verification, but we can't tell whose product it is. It looks like he had it custom made somehow, which surely he could do. Just to not be wearing a brand unless he's, sponsored or something like that. He probably has deals that would preclude him from wearing a branded pair for sure. But anyway, and we know that because it's the same with several of the other players. But many of them, men's singles number 6 in the world, women's singles number 4 in the world, Rybakina, Andrei Rublev, and several others, they've all been picking it up. And since they all travel together, they're all like this. So I've been on the phone with the managers of some of the top players just yesterday, like number 3 in the world. Fascinating. And they work. So it's not like we're making stuff up. We see the data.
It's incredible, man. I think the reason I wanted you on is because I think you can explain what's going on at a deeper level. And I appreciate the school lesson. Something that was really helpful to me to think about is that we think of eyes as vision centers that we see through, and they are that, but they're more than that. They are clocks that tell the time using light. And that if we are getting the wrong time signals from our environment at the wrong times of day, that's obviously going to lead to all of these issues that you talked about. The sleep being a huge one. If you're not sleeping well, you're not repairing well, you are not thriving at your highest potential. But another thing that gets really fascinating is we can't just leave this at the sleep thing because it impacts everything else. You tell me how I may have even stole this analogy from you, so maybe I'm just regurgitating it back to you, but something along the lines of, you can put the best quality fuel in the machine. We highly suggest you do that, and something like an animal-based diet, earth-grown nutrients, clean, organic, good proteins, good fats, stable fats, all of that stuff. But if the fuel that's really good is coming in and the engine is broken, you're not going to go very far, right? If the pistons are cracked, if the spark plug isn't sparking, then the fuel can only take you so far. You're really looking at light here as an engine, a spark plug, and how that relates to the machinery really that runs the show, the mitochondria and energy production, because it's much more than sleep, right? This is why light diet is your term. This is malillumination, like malnutrition, right? Tell me a little bit more about how light regulates metabolism and energy.
Yeah, well, first of all, you nailed the analogy, so I don't think I have to restate it. It's perfect. There is this whole system in our body that is designed like a car engine, much more similarly than one might think on the surface, actually, to burn fuel. And what does a car engine do? Well, it burns fuel. It consumes hydrogen-based fuel in the form of gasoline or diesel, and it puts energy in, And that initial spark, which is, for example, in the case of the spark plugs, the battery, and then the spark plugs firing the pistons, that energy causes hydrogen to break off of its storage molecule, which would be carbon in the case of a hydrocarbon, or which is the same as sugar or fat. And then the hydrogens are free. And then hydrogens that are free, well, think about like a blimp filled with hydrogen. As soon as the hydrogen's exposed to oxygen, what happens? They bind. And when they bind, they release a lot of energy. They make water first, and they release a lot of energy as a result. And that's fire. So that energy is fire. And so basically, it's interesting, right? Water makes fire, and fire makes water. Sounds very spiritually profound when I put it that way. But in fact, it's true. So in the case of the car engine, the hydrogen on the hydrocarbon fuel, hydrogens are ripped off using the spark, the energy. They start binding with the oxygen, which is allowed into the engine in certain quantities. They make water. The water comes out the exhaust pipe as steam, which you don't even see, which is why we don't think that fires make water, but it is there. And then the ton of energy that's released is used to fire the pistons and cause things to move in ways that I don't fully understand because I'm not an expert on car engines. But anyway, in the mitochondria, it is quite the same. We also consume hydrogen-based fuel in the form of carbohydrates or fats. And then we input energy from, well, in the process of, for example, the Krebs cycle, we input energy to break off the hydrogens, and then we input we break down the molecules, and then we get the simplest form, let's say NADH, which can then donate the hydrogens to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. And then those hydrogens actually go into the inner membrane space, or inner mitochondrial space, which is the mitochondrial matrix, and the electrons from the hydrogen, which are the excited electrons, they run across this chain, the electron transport chain, and then that energy is used to pump the hydrogens across this membrane into this mitochondrial matrix. And it's basically just a system where life is using energy to kind of like push a bunch of balls like into one position, and then gravity will like pull them down and causing a turbine to spin. So it's like, dude, push all this stuff up and then go down through this turbine and make it spin. And in this case, the turbine is the ATPase. So packing a lot of hydrogen in the mitochondrial matrix causes the hydrogens, they're positively charged, so they push against each other. It causes them to go out of the ATPase, and it causes the ATPase to spin just like a turbine, and then that's used to make ATP, which is one of the energy currencies of biology for biochemical reactions and so on. But what's actually happening there at the end of the mitochondrial respiration process, it's called oxidative phosphorylation. So it's phosphorylating ATP using oxidation, and what's being oxidized is the food that we consume. But so anyway, then at the end, the hydrogen binds with oxygen. So oxygen, this is the reason we breathe. So we breathe in the oxygen, and that oxygen is being used to pull the electrons towards it because it has a very strong electronegative pull. And that energy is being siphoned out along that chain along the way with oxygen pulling it. Now, this is quite a detailed explanation, but it's important for people to understand, I think, why this is important and what's happening. So basically, and it is quite simple, in fact, if you look at it. It's just an internal fire, like Wim Hof talks about, but oxygen's pulling the electrons across the chain. I can explain how fascinating this is for me with one story, which is that when I was a freshman in high school in biology, I asked my biology teacher, bro, I didn't call him bro, but Mr. Tudor, why do the electrons flow across the chain? Like, how do they know to go across the chain? And he's just like, they just do. And I was like, really? You can't explain it any better than that? And he obviously didn't understand it even at this level, unfortunately. I probably shouldn't have named him. Sorry, Mr. Tudor. But anyway,
we love you, Mr. Tudor.
That's how it is. So basically, the oxygen has this strong electronegativity, which is why it causes, bike chains to rust and these kind of things. It's quite a damaging molecule, in fact. And that's why life that managed, but it's also very powerful. Life that figured out how to master the use of oxygen is the life that took over the world. Melatonin is the antioxidant molecule that showed up at around the same time that oxygen entered the atmosphere in significant quantities because of photosynthesis and the Cambrian explosion in this time period. And so melatonin is actually the antidote to oxygen, to oxidative damage that is caused as a result of oxygen production, or as a result of using oxygen to make energy. So let's bring this together a little bit more. So when you're making energy in the mitochondria with electrons flowing down the electron transport chain, inevitably the process isn't always perfectly efficient. And what happens is that there's metabolic smoke that's produced. And this is called reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. And these molecules are these sort of rogue agents that are going around trying to steal electrons from elsewhere. And the better our mitochondria work in general, the less free radicals we make. And the worse our mitochondria work, the more free radicals we make. And a lot of this is actually necessary for signaling. So like enough free radicals actually stimulate the process of new mitochondria, production of new mitochondria, because it's like, okay, the other ones are bad and old now. So melatonin, what it does is it actually scavenges these free radical molecules. So it's antioxidant. It's scavenging free radical molecules. But the idea, just making a note here that's relevant, the idea of like overdosing on antioxidants all the time is a little bit misguided, because you can also disrupt the very delicate system that's necessary, as I said before, for informing the body of what's going on and, to make new mitochondria or not. So you don't want to OD on antioxidants. Better to fix the system so that you're not producing so much oxidative damage in the first place. How? Melatonin, which is produced with daylight exposure to sunlight in the day, especially in the morning, and then absence of light at night, or in other words, darkness, so that the melatonin can be secreted. So that's kind of high level. Just to try to wrap it together once more. So the key thing for people to really understand is when I'm breathing, like long, slow, deep nose inhales, which, it's hard when you're talking a bunch, but that's how, the best way to breathe is long, slow, deep nose inhales constantly. Keep your fire as consistent as possible. Really like keep it really balanced. This is why all the yogi stuff is fascinating to me, because all of this led to that. And if we have a few minutes, we could also touch on stuff like that if you'd like. But anyway, so basically what we're doing with that oxygen is using it to pull electrons towards it and generate energy and keep this system going in our mitochondria. So we're taking hydrogen-based fuel and oxygen from the air, we're burning them. We make water. Water is the end product of mitochondrial respiration, and the water hydrates our cells. And then the energy, the fire, is used again to pump those protons across the gradient. Some of it's released as heat. Depending on the mitochondrial haplotype that you carry, some mitochondria are more or less efficient than others. Like sub-Saharan African L0, the kind of godmother mitochondrial haplotype that is considered where all the others came from. That was mapped out by this guy, Dr. Douglas Wallace, and his team from the University of Pennsylvania years and years ago. He's an older researcher now, but he's been studying this for decades. They found that basically certain mitochondria are optimized for very, very hot environments. So they produce less heat, so they're more efficient. And kudos here to Dr. Jack Fruce, because he put a lot of these pieces together, and I learned a lot of this from him, as well as to mention the clock versus camera analogy. He put that very nicely. I'm sure he wasn't the first person to come up with it, but anyhow. And so, I like to give credit where credit's due. So to Dr. Douglas Wallace and his research, he would talk about how basically in Africa, you need that extra energy to run away from a lion, for example, right? And so this is why these, for example, African people win marathons consistently. Of course, some Europeans will, but biologically we're disadvantaged. We don't have that capacity that they do for, consistent aerobic respiration as effectively. And they're much more efficient. But Dr. Wallace says in some of his lectures, but if you go north, you're not going to have to run away from lions, but you're going to freeze to death in Northern Europe, So humans being very adaptable, unlike, let's say, lions, like they never made these adaptations. There were saber-toothed tigers, so some of them did make these adaptations. But anyway, humans then in northerly places or far southerly places actually focus on being less efficient in the mitochondria, releasing more energy, which means releasing more energy as heat, which is actually a benefit. So it's actually important, but that's part of why, like, I, and maybe you would too, struggle being in Indonesia or Bali or Costa Rica, because it's hot, really hot, right? Sometimes I literally feel like I'm dying from the heat. If I'm not in AC, I can't think. Like after 95 degrees Fahrenheit or even 90 plus, but with that humidity, it's just like, oh, I can't even think. So yeah, this is kind of how the mitochondrial respiration thing works. To your question was just basically, how else is light affecting our system? So, and how is it related to the diet and so on? If we sleep well, again, back to your original point, then mitochondria are going to work better. And we're going to be able to produce energy with less reactive oxygen species and have less of this damage, which ultimately causes aging, this reactive oxygen species damage. So if we can repair more, then every day when reactive oxygen species and oxidative damage is accumulated, which is aging, we can kind of reset the clock a little bit closer to where we started. And then the difference in the damage we accumulate and what we're able to repair while we sleep is aging, the difference each day. And so the goal would be to, maximize the repair and minimize the damage. And proper light hygiene, a healthy light diet can, play a really significant role in this process.
That's fascinating. I love that closing analogy there of what aging is. Would you say there is like a minimum effective dose for the natural light sources we get? Obviously, considerations for where you are and things like that. But practically speaking, because a lot of people are going to be like, but I work, 9 to 5. Do you have like at the bare minimum, you should be spending X amount of time outdoors? And I'm guessing ideally more is better, as long as more is not getting you frazzled in the sun.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily say more is better at this point, but I would say that being under artificial sources is definitely not really natural. And so, like, when we're talking about sunlight, we should distinguish like being in direct sunlight or being in just exposed to natural lighting. And as far as that goes, then I would say, more is better, in the sense that if your choice is between natural light or artificial light, I would choose natural light. But that doesn't mean you need to be like constantly out in the light. As far as sunbathing goes, if it varies wildly. But I generally suggest people, well, it's springtime in the US now. So for Americans, it's a really, really good time. In fact, it's the best time to start practicing sunbathing now, so that in the summer, your system is prepared. Your system is prepared for the high intensity ultraviolet light, and you're going to be able to manage it, versus waiting till July to start sunbathing and then cooking yourself and causing damage in your body. That's not the best idea. Now is the best opportunity to do that. But, I would, like, personally, I sunbathe 10, 15 minutes per day, sometimes more. Sometimes I just don't, because I'm just busy and not thinking about it. But like usually I'll do 5 to 10 minutes on each side of my body, depending on, so it could be 10 to 20 minutes total, depending on the time of day. Like if it's the middle of the day and the sun's really strong, I might have like 3 to 5 minutes on each side of my body, especially when it's like UV 15 in Indonesia and something, or Costa Rica. Yeah, then I don't need that much. I actually surf pretty much every day. And so I'm already out in the light for several hours in the morning when it's less strong. But cumulatively, I feel that I get more than a sufficient dose. So anyway, as far as sunbathing goes, it's very unique. Just I wouldn't burn. I wouldn't overdo it. I wouldn't stay in the sun when you feel overheated. I used to do that. Thought, oh, more sun's better. Terrible idea. I would burn, hurt my system, and stress it out tremendously. So don't do that. And then as far as general daylight exposure, Dr. Alexander Wunsch told me years ago when I was first connecting with him, he said, and he's, again, like the leading expert in the world really in this field of photobiology, as far as I'm concerned, and a very holistic approach, not just like a scientist at, Yale or Harvard or Stanford or whatever, who's like this, nothing against these scientists, but who's to, focus, he brings in a much more holistic perspective, which is why we work with him to develop great products. But so he said minimum 2 hours per day of
Cool.
unfiltered daylight. That doesn't mean sunbathing, but just getting outside, be outside of a window.
Yes.
And I would say if you can, skew that towards the morning hours, it's going to be really beneficial. Or like an hour in the morning, get out as early as you can, maybe go for a walk. Like what I do a lot of the time, to be honest, is I'll go out and just get 5 or 10 minutes, like in the morning, like when the sun's just coming up. In fact, it is just coming up right now. Like it's just getting light. It's like first light, dawn. So I'll go out and get like 10 minutes or so, just like looking out at the light. If I can't see the sun directly, I'll just look at the sky. Like when I'm up in a high-rise hotel like I am now, I'll go out to this one floor where they have like an open pool, and it's not a direct view of the light, but I'm just like of the sun, but I'm just getting it reflection off the building, so it's quite bright still, sufficiently bright. And then maybe go in and have my breakfast, and then go out for like a walk or something later. That's what I might do if I'm in a city. If I'm surfing, then I'm surfing, and that's like early and for many hours, so it's very strong stimulus. So just so people kind of get a perspective. But I would definitely emphasize, as Huberman does, like 10-ish minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, minimum like 5, but ideally a bit more, to really get that punch, so to speak. At sunrise, around sunrise is really good, really get that. And then from there, if you can go out and go for like an hour walk or a half-hour walk later, or if you want to do that sunrise, fine too. But I'd say consistently getting out is important too.
Excellent. Yeah.
In fact, it's very important. If you're sitting in an office, you should add this. If you're sitting in an office and you're wearing blue light protection glasses, you should get out every hour for like at least 2 to 3 to 5 minutes, just to get that reminder, like, oh, it's still day. Because ultimately the price of protecting our eyes during the day is that, from these disruptive artificial sources, like there's 2 options. One is get the blue light, which will of course affect our circadian system and hormones in a way, but it also comes with the oxidative damage issues for the retinal damage issues, and not really the hormonal stimulation that's exactly natural or that we want. So then the price of protecting. So basically what I like to explain is, like, once you're in artificial light, all bets are kind of off, right? Like it's not really natural, it's disruptive. So better just block it and then go and get the natural stimulus every hour, so your brain knows what time it is. That's really the best move. Trying to use the artificial light to get that stimulus is a dubitable approach. And it could be risky.
I like it. I think in an ideal world as well, if you just kind of try and stack these and build them into your lifestyle as naturally as possible, because they're habits now. Like it becomes a habit to go outside and, rise with the sun and, do a little skyward gazing or whatever it is. And also to, make an extra conscious effort to take that walk at lunchtime and get out again. Build these into your life so you're accidentally bolstering your light diet. And of course, when you're inside staring at screens, as so many of us do these days, is put on the blue light blocking glasses. I'm not going to keep you for too much longer because I know you've got to go and get that natural sunlight now as the sunrise. But just to be clear, you would take the glasses off when you're outside, right? Is there a bad time to wear blue light blocking glasses? Is there a wrong time?
I mean, you kind of nailed it. I would say like outside during the day isn't really the best time. However, what I've learned recently is that if somebody's outside for excessive periods of time, well, it's hard to say excessive periods of time, but if somebody's outside and their eyes are extremely sensitive and they're like convinced that they have to wear sunglasses, using something like the raw optics sunset lenses actually during the day can be a superior option to most sunglasses, simply because they block the shorter wavelengths in a very consistent manner while still transmitting the longer wavelengths, which in general, if we were to kind of summarize some of the things we've discussed today, the shorter wavelengths are more, although they're also very stimulating for biology. So they have certain effects like blue light waking us up and so on. And they also, like ultraviolet provides power for key biochemical reactions like the production of the synthesis of vitamin D. They're more damaging on the whole. They're very powerful. And the longer wavelengths like red and near infrared are more regenerative in a sense. They have, from a biochemical perspective, they support our cells. We didn't really get into this, but in fact, this is a good thing that I kind of glossed over, but in the conversation of how light can improve our mitochondrial energy production, red and near infrared light have been shown to improve mitochondrial energy production. So just by being in daylight, like a natural daylight, we're getting something that studies are showing improves our mitochondrial energy production. Well, I don't think it takes a genius at all. I think all of your listeners can make this connection to think, well, wait a minute. If the studies are showing that red and near infrared light actually benefit mitochondrial function, and daylight already has tons of red and near infrared light, maybe that's just our default state. Like maybe that's just how, in fact, it's not maybe, it's obvious, because we didn't have anything besides really full spectrum natural daylight for a long time, and moonlight and starlight and lightning and bioluminescent, animals and plants and whatnot. And then fire were the only natural sources of light. So it's really just daylight and fire and moonlight, and the others are much dimmer and less significant for biology. So point being outside improves your mitochondrial energy production, which also reduces reactive oxygen species. So this, again, I guess I kind of glossed over this, but just having near infrared light present, red and near infrared light, reduces the production of free radicals. And this has been shown in research, just plain scientific research. And so one of the main issues with modern artificial light sources is that they have, and I implied this from the beginning, but they have a lot of blue light, but without this crucial near infrared, which became effectively illegal in light sources under the regulations when the incandescent bulbs were banned, because it was considered wasted energy. So I have something right here that I'm using. It looks like it died, but it's called a near infrared emitter. So I'm shining this myself while I'm sitting on my podcast, just to get the near infrared that's good for my cells. Now, again, it's dead, so you wouldn't be able to see it anyway. But if I turn it on, you wouldn't see very much. But cameras are more sensitive to near infrared than the human eye, because that's how camera vision works, like night vision goggles and things work, infrared, So anyway, I use this to offset or to sort of balance the effects of the visible light, even though I have blue blocking on my screen and very low blue setting on my video light. There's always near infrared present with any visible light. So even if I have very low blue light, I'm still going to add a little near infrared. But if there's high intensities of blue light, I would want to have even more near infrared. So this is something that increases, again, mitochondrial energy production, mitochondrial efficiency, etc., and also reduces the oxidative damage that's happening in the presence of light, because light, especially the shorter wavelengths, are always causing this kind of effect. It's just a matter of how much. And so near infrared, again, in the sun balances this. So getting outside is good. Again, just to get back to the point of when not to wear them, or, sunglasses. The lenses that we make, the sunset lenses, they block all the ultraviolet as well, as do these, but they also transmit the longer wavelengths. And so they block the shorter wavelengths. So you can get kind of the best of both worlds. You can block the shorter wavelengths, which in excess can be damaging, and keep the longer wavelengths. So if somebody really, really wanted to wear sunglasses, I would suggest wearing our sunset lenses outside. And that can be great, rather than kind of distorting and chopping up the spectrum for some kind of cool look or effect like many sunglasses do. It's a much simpler approach you could even argue. I don't take this, I don't go there, because even though we could, it's not my main focus. I want to educate people. We can make more money doing it too, but I want to focus on the message and mission of, protecting from artificial sources and getting more daylight. But people think the glasses are sunglasses half the time. So, like people who don't know. So we could definitely sell a bunch if we just marketed this. And we might at one point, but you can think of them like therapeutic eyewear. Therapeutic, you can use them outside. We just would say don't wear them all day. Yeah. If you do only go outside for 2 hours, definitely don't wear them then. But if you're outside all day, like at tennis or something, okay, or you're on a boat, okay, maybe it's all right for a little bit.
Excellent. I want to close this by talking about something that I've noticed from you, which is kind of really cool full circle moment on the whole light diet piece. You obviously understand the biochemical and physiological effects of light quite profoundly, but I'm interested in your more kind of recent evolution in terms of thinking of light also as this inner light, the cultivation of the inner light. You teased it a little while back about this is what got you fascinated by the yogis and the spiritual path, and we hear about, going to the light and enlightenment. Talk to me a little bit about how those two worlds are colliding for you as a nice close to ground this in more of the spiritual world as well as the sciencey world.
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, and I'm more than glad to answer. It's my favorite subject to discuss, in fact, at this point. So I like everything else too, as you can tell, but this is really interesting for me. The reason that this subject is interesting for me is because I spent all these years, and I implied this from the beginning, that it took much longer to get to what I now consider the root cause. And I now consider the inner light much more of the root cause than the external light.
Hmm.
They're all relevant, just like
Mm-hmm.
nutrition's still relevant, just like light's still relevant. But so I was on this journey since I was a kid, as I mentioned, trying the diets, getting into light, and then diving into the world of light. And I came to be convinced by the research I was reading and the people I was following that if I could optimize my light diet, my external light exposure, that I would be able to be happy. Because ultimately, what I really wanted was to be happy, what I was searching for. Besides the sort of more superficial or surface level, or at least intro level issues of wanting to improve my health, which is a relevant thing, very relevant. But and it's something that, if somebody's focused on that, I think that's phenomenal to want to improve oneself. But for me, that was like, let's say, a starting place. And it was something I still work on, improving my energy and everything I can. But anyway, at a certain point, it was really more that I just wanted to feel good. Let's say I just wanted to feel the way that I thought was possible and live a great life and be happy. That's really what was driving me, looking back at it. And especially when I was obsessed about diets and nutrition, but even when I became obsessed about light, I wasn't really happy. In fact, I was like making myself unhappy by basically saying that, you know, there is a perfect way to do everything, and it's outside of me. It's something that I have to like strive for, and maybe one day I'll get it and I'll be perfect. And then with the light thing, I became convinced, as I was getting at before, that I would be able to basically optimize my brain chemistry and hormones and neurotransmitters in such a way to make me happy, to make me a happy person. Like that I'd be able to get enough morning sunlight to make enough dopamine and serotonin, and I'd be able to, block the artificial light, optimize my sleep, and become like supercharged, like superhuman, right? And I had this inspiration ever since I learned about the diets in the beginning. Like there is this possibility to be superhuman. I just got to figure it out. And so in the end, I ended up pretty miserable, actually. Like I was building the company, I was traveling around the world, and I had all this freedom, like some financial freedom, physical freedom. My time wasn't really free, to be honest, because I was working so much, and that was contributing to feeling stuck. But I was struggling. I was like 19, 20 years old. I had started the business at 18, or just as I was turning 18. And so like 2 to 3 years in, I was really struggling, basically. And it's like I could be in Croatia. Like I remember one time I was in Croatia, one of the most beautiful places in the world. I imagine you've been, but it's amazing. But I was feeling so empty, and I was doing all the right things, like from the perspective of nutrition and sunlight and whatnot. And I just felt super lonely and empty and kind of miserable. And then I just remember having maybe the best thought I've ever had in my life, which was like, if I knew everything, because I was so convinced, like a know-it-all, that I knew everything. I was like, if my model is complete of biology, then I should be happy. I should be able to be happy if I really understand how all this works. And it was obvious to me, I don't. I didn't. I really didn't. Not saying that I do now, but I didn't then, definitely. And that began, COVID situation came around then. And so I really was forced to look into some alternative approaches. And I had heard about several different spiritual teachers throughout my time, psycho kind of people thinking about psychology, and just that approach. I realized that had to be my approach. I had to figure out my mind, something, because that was where I was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to figure something out, whether it was like, Alan Watts or Carl Jung or something, Jordan Peterson. I read lots of some Jordan Peterson stuff. I loved his work. And his work got me kind of more interested in the Bible, which I was interested in a little bit as a kid, even though my parents were kind of not super like religious per se. Yeah. Anyway, one thing led to the next. And I just felt, when you're stressed and you're in survival, you feel like you don't have time, right? And so I didn't feel like I even had time to read a lot of books other than maybe like the core necessities for my business. And so I actually also felt like if I go into some practice, it has to give me a result. I'm like, I can't go do some course or some 6 month or year-long thing where I'm going to look back and be like, I'm no better off than where I started. I needed a result. So I had to like really feel like who or what can I do that's going to give me a result, like this Tai Chi or Eastern practices that I've heard of or whatever. Like, I've had come across so many different things, as I'm sure practically everyone here does. And I just had to kind of listen to my heart, if you will. And I actually was drawn to this guy, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and his work because I had heard about him a few times from different people. I listened to him on Aubrey Marcus's podcast a couple times, and I was like, this guy just seems super legit. He seems happy. He seems like he's walking the talk. Well, little did I know, I did his online course and it blew my mind. And I remember calling a buddy of mine and saying like, dude, because this is a friend of mine who was with me through like a lot of challenging times as a kid. He was always there as a friend to hear me out. And it would kind of deal with a lot of my, let's say, BS, and not managing my energy well, maybe not being the best friend, but he was just a great friend. So he was always there. And anyway, I remember calling him and being like, dude, like, you're not going to believe this, but I've been creating all of my suffering. Like, I was responsible for this. Like, I've been choosing to be miserable. And I like never forget where I was driving on the freeway in LA after this massive hike I did back to San Diego, on this day and in this conversation. It was very profound. And then from there, it was just like it changed. It was like it didn't happen overnight, but I started going to these in-person meditation retreats with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he explained science exquisitely. His version of taking the research and trying to put it together in a way to kind of explain spirituality. Not saying that his teachings are the be all end all, and the kind of thing that everybody should do. For me, it just made sense because he was kind of trying to link in science. And plenty of people, more, let's say, formal scientists might say, oh, that doesn't really make sense or this or that. But I'm not really worried about that personally, because even though I do believe in science and the value of science as a tool, I don't mistake the tool for God. Basically, like it's just another tool, like science has basically replaced God with a microscope, and microscope is the God that now, it's like they think that you can understand the nature of the universe by looking at things smaller and smaller and smaller. And they're just like, well, we still don't have a clue what's going on. Literally. I mean, and I'm not making this up, like quantum physicists, like we don't have a clue. Is it string theory? Is it this theory? Is it that? We really don't know. Like we don't have a clue. We know how it looks and works on a Newtonian level at a big level, but we don't know how it works at the base. We just don't. That is, and anybody can challenge me on this, please. They think they know, but they really don't. And they'll admit that. Even Einstein was like, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to understand what light is, So anyway, so that led me to, maybe a little long-winded, but I think it's worth it. So that led me to researching a little bit more, because I realized, wait a minute, like this makes sense what Dr. Joe was talking about. It's not all about the external stuff. It actually has a lot to do with our internal, let's say, management of our inner light, our inner energy. That's what I would call it, inner light versus outer light, right? That has maybe plays as much or more of a role, I think, in health and well-being, and above all else, in consciousness and your experience of life, happy, sad, excited, depressed, or whatever. That plays a bigger role, I think, than the external factors. Truly, I believe this now. And I'm convinced because I felt it myself. And so I thought, well, surely, Dr. Joe wasn't the first person talking about this. Like he's not, right? He'd admit that. People have talked about this for thousands of years. He's explaining it in a unique way with his own language based on scientific principles, which I tremendously appreciate. But people have been doing this for thousands of years. And so I thought, who could I read then? And then a book came to me through a recommendation of a friend of mine, actually a mutual friend through whom I got to know Paul a bit in Costa Rica. And he recommended to me the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, which happened to be Steve Jobs' favorite book, which he kept on his iPad, read it every year, and gifted 500 copies to the people who attended his memorial service with the message, realize yourself. And I read that book and I was like, wow, there's a bunch of teachers. I'm not telling anybody they should go down this path or that path. Pursue whatever you want, Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, anything. But for me, it just resonated, this message, like, uh, how do I put this? So God, when I use the term God, I'm not saying I know what God is, right? But God is a term that humans have used for thousands of years, or gods, to just encapsulate the forces responsible for our existence and this universe and our perception of everything, right? That's when I say God, that's all I mean. That's it, right? The thing that created it all, whether it was the Big Bang Theory or something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it's a dude with a beard up in the sky. It's the force behind all forces, if there is one, which I think there has to be, but who knows, right? And then obviously some religions had many gods because there's the force. And when I met this researcher, just as a side note, Dr. Douglas Wallace, he even said this to me. He said, like, back in the day, people literally personified the rain and the sun, and they created a person out of it to feel like they could kind of bargain with it, to try to, understand it better, because they didn't have science. He was coming from a more scientific perspective, like, we now have science so we can understand. But anyway, all this is to say, I became convinced about a few key things, which is that our management of our inner energy, as I said before, is as important or more important than the external light we're exposed to. There are stories of yogis who never got any sunlight, which kind of blew my mind. I was, oh, sun, like yogis, meaning maybe they did as a kid, but like at a certain point they were in this like ecstatic state where they just lived in a cave and their disciples just came to them, but they looked young and vibrant and healthy, and they just basically lived on this like spiritual life. And that was very fascinating for me. And so I had to, of course, like say, oh, either I'm going to discard that, like that's a made up story, or I'm going to try to be open-minded to think, well, how could that work? And I do believe if you tune your consciousness and channel your consciousness, now this, and I'll disclaim always when something I'm sharing is more science-based or more conjecture. But to me, it kind of makes sense that if our consciousness is some kind of energy, and by the way, and this is what the spiritual teachings say, and it's also just this is a scientific fact, our energy is not different from the energy that makes up the rest of the universe. It's the same. When we die, where does it go? It's the law of conservation of energy. The energy that is in the trees and the birds and the wind, it's somehow part of it is in us, right? Some of that energy, that kinetic energy, the motion, the solar energy, which causes the weather patterns, is also the energy in us, right? Basic facts. So when we die, that energy goes out somewhere and moves on. So if our energy is essentially the same as the energy of the universe, well, maybe, this is conjecture now, maybe we could somehow kind of tune our energy to kind of be more in tune with the energy outside of us and kind of deepen our perception and kind of awareness. And again, is this pure science? No. But are there tons and tons and tons of stories throughout history of people with sort of a sixth sense? There's movies named after it, right? Like there's a sense, an intuition that I think everybody kind of knows exists and wants to believe exists, even if science hasn't caught up yet to that. And I phrase it that way very intentionally, because I look at science like trying to explain things that a lot of people already know. Like in traditional Indian medicine, Ayurveda, for example, they found a lot of things which happen to be really aligned with circadian rhythm science today, like meal timing and all sorts of things like that. And now modern science is kind of catching up to a lot of these ancient things. Same with traditional Chinese medicine. So anyway, that's a bit about my spiritual journey. I appreciate you letting me go through that. And I really do believe now that if somebody is in the same way that if somebody's focusing on nutrition but not managing their light diet, their light exposure, that's going to have certain biochemical, physical impacts. If somebody's focusing, and I'm speaking purely from my own experience, if somebody's focusing on even their light environment and their light diet, external, but they're not cultivating their inner light, you could be doing everything to optimize your brain chemistry, hormones, this and that, and still end up feeling empty and miserable on the inside. But if you take time to start to, for example, practice something like meditation and connect to your inner self, I guess you could say, that's kind of the idea, and connect then, because you can only connect with God, like beyond, if you've connected to your inner self. That's the concept, your soul. Think in Hinduism, it's like Atman and Paramatman. So Atman is like your inner soul. Paramatman is like your higher self. And then you can connect through that to like the greater, source. And the final thing, I guess what I would add here is that there are enough stories of people doing supernatural things, like having supernatural powers and things like this. And they don't hide anything. They say that, it's through their ability to connect with this greater energy, which first requires them to go inward. And even Dr. Joe Dispenza at his retreats, I've witnessed people who literally had some kind of cancer or some disease coming on the stage explaining how they're healed. And they know that they healed themselves through their meditation because they believed, they had faith, and they felt themselves being healed throughout the process. Some didn't, some did, but they experienced it in the end. And science still doesn't have quite answers for this spontaneous remission, as it's called, but it's happened enough times. I've had people ask me, don't you think they just pay those people? I'm like, there's hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Like, I don't think they just pay them all. Like, I have some faith, like I know Dr. Joe. I think he's an amazing person. I think he's really authentic and genuine and truly doing the work. And that's why I was drawn to him and still am. So, by the way, just like shameless plug, they're releasing an amazing, cool documentary documenting some of the science. So if anybody's interested, I don't know when it's going to be out exactly, but maybe check that out. It's called Source. They've already announced it. So it'll be out in a month or two or whatever, something like that. So anyway, thank you so much, brother. That's my story. If you have any other questions, I still have a few more minutes, but that's my experience.
I appreciate it, man. And I wanted to offer that space as well, because I think the take home message there is like, we can get really lost in the weeds. We can get really heady, and it's fun for us and it's exciting, and education is really good motivation. And all of these things are levers. But I think that you're onto something that I've experienced myself personally. Yes, the food matters. Yes, the movement matters. Yes, the light diet externally matters. But this thing about going inward and connecting to self in whichever way we do it and what we choose to worship, because we all worship something at the end of the day, is really important to get that in alignment so you can create alignment with the world out there. And these natural practices are usually the things that are going to remind us of that. It's no coincidence that getting out in nature and being in natural light and being in the sun just instantly makes you feel good. And hopefully that gets you out more in the forest, walking barefoot and grounding and connecting and eating real food that comes from nature. And it's the remembering, it's the pipeline then back to remembering that we can honor this life and this body and the great mystery and everything that comes with it, and that's really important too. So not to negate that, because in the science realm, I think we can get, very heady and we can lose that too. And then, we worship scientism instead of whatever else it is. So find something that works for you and, run with that. And I really appreciate you sharing. I appreciate your knowledge. It's really cool. It took me to school today. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners learned a lot as well. So I appreciate you, Matt. Thank you very much. Where can people go to keep up with you and everything that you do and pick up a pair of these fancy glasses? Shameless plug, my turn. ST10 will save you 10% on these bad boys. Let's go.
Yeah. Great. So people can find us on rawoptics.com, raoptics.com. No R-A-W, not raw, like the sun god, rawoptics.com. And then people can follow us on Instagram at raw_optics, and people can follow me if they want at The Light Diet. People can also send me a DM. I respond to all my DMs almost always. So yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Connect.
You're the man. Go enjoy that sunrise. Go get that light diet dialed in, brother.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, brother. You guys are great. I appreciate what you do. Thanks for your work.
All right, man. Thank you. Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye-bye. We'll see you next week, family. Thank you. Go get some sunshine. Pooh! All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.